between the family. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. The Cold War, 1949 to 1990. It's part of the textbooks, how the whole world was embroiled in the struggles, the pressures, and the pushes. What doesn't always come through in our textbooks is the human impact on their psyche, on their lives, on families, on their religions, on becoming refugees, etc. And to think about the trauma, not only in the short term, but also lifelong. We need to understand it. I know I need to expand my understanding of that whole perception. Today we have a poet and an author and someone that I've come to call a friend, Maija Rhee Devine. Maija, we came in contact through her poetry, and we'll let her explain about how she wrote that and how she deals with the issue of comfort women. It's a very powerful story. And we want to ask her about her own personal experiences as we saw the development of things and events and circumstances that came up to the Korean War, South and North, 1950. Maija, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Armando. It's always a pleasure to be on the program. Today, especially, I am very, very emotional as I talk about this topic, the Cold War and the Korean War, which is part of the Cold War period history. I lived it as a 7-year-old. I turned 7 when the war, North Korea attacked South Korea, June 25th, 1950. And I was just a primary school, first grader. And suddenly, all of a sudden, just tanks that we see on TV today. For the last few months, we've been seeing tanks, Russian-made tanks, just roaring down our streets in our neighborhood down there, and all over Seoul. They were there making a lot of noise, and also Russian-made bomber planes were dropping bombs. They dropped the bombs right on the Han River Bridge, which we had to cross in order to escape down to the south.
Was there any warning at all? I mean, was there any talk between the families? There might be a problem coming down in the next few days or nothing?
South Koreans were very tense that it could happen, just as they are now. Now North Korea is threatening the world and South Korea with nuclear power. And South Koreans are tense. But because this tension has been going on for so long, 72 years, that some of them became immune to that tension. But overall, South Koreans all feel that way. And similarly, before the Korean War broke out too, there were rumors, but many of us were just thinking it's rumors, because that kind of North-South conflict had been going on for several years, about 1949 through 1950, when the war actually broke out. For 3 years, there were talks of South Korean President Maija Rhee asking for U.S. aid so that he could invade the North. So there were rumors about South Koreans invading North, but there were quote unquote evidences that North Korea was serious and they were planning on invading. So yes, there was tension. I wouldn't say anybody expected it on June 25th. It was Sunday, and we just woke up to a nice beautiful June day, and suddenly there were noises And we woke up to tanks and North Korean soldiers in their uniforms with their guns slung on their shoulders, just running, all of us swarming through our neighborhoods and all the neighborhoods in Seoul. In 3 days, the South Korean government collapsed because we had no weapons, no tanks, no fighter planes. We were unprepared. President Seung-man Rhee had been begging and begging to President Truman to send some weapons, planes, bombs, and everything, so that he could be prepared, because he knew they would be coming down from the north. But President Truman would not hear of it. So totally unprepared.
Let's go back to what you said, that day that it happened, that day when the tanks are running through the town and you're seeing the soldiers. What was the reaction in your family as you looked at each other and tried to make sense of it? Can you bring me back to that day, how the conversation went throughout that day between all of you?
It was dawn. And so by the time the North Koreans, a lot of the troops were in Seoul, we woke up to a new day, and neighbors all began to gather. And neighbors, our neighbors and other people, already dug a bomb shelter in our homes under the floor between 2 bedrooms. There's an empty open air space where people could eat and whatever. Under that floor, my father and neighbors got together and they dug bomb shelters so we could go down there. We did. And neighbors did too. All went down. It was just the walls of the bomb shelter was just dirt. It was just like a grave dug under a floor, wood floor. And it had a little trapdoor. We just slid down there and we hid. That's what we did the first day.
How many persons fit in that, the way it was built at that time? How many people fit in there?
Because it was built under the largest open air space between bedrooms, it was large enough for my parents, my grandma, and I. So that's 4 people at that time.
Did they have supplies already there? Food, water,
no,
services?
No.
It was just the 4 walls.
Yes, dirt walls. We sat on the dirt. We didn't even, I guess we didn't really believe we would need to go down there that quickly and that soon. And so it was totally unprepared area, just a hole, like a grave that was just freshly dug. And we sat there, no bathroom. We had to climb out of the hole to go to the bathroom and to grab something to eat. But no, there was nothing.
Was there a conversation going on, somewhat, I would assume, preparing everyone for the worst to come in days to come? Advice to the women, older children, advice to the males, older, younger?
Not specifically to older women or children. Adults, if they talked about it, I was not part of that conversation, but I did overhear a group of men, neighborhood men, got together at night, and it was a full moon night, and they had a mirror, and this is before the war broke out. They had a mirror, and they were holding it at different angles toward the moon, and they believed that at certain angle there would appear some kind of a mirror from the moon, and the image would give them some kind of a feeling something was going to happen, whether the North Koreans would invade or not. And apparently they saw some red coloring on that mirror, and they all agreed, yes, they're going to come down. It's going to happen. Attack is about to happen. They knew just a few days before that. But that was from that kind of folk kind of way of foretelling what may be happening.
So as days evolved, and I'm assuming the invasion continued and the soldiers were going by and there was more activity, what was beginning to set in the mindset? Are we going to get up our things and leave? Are we just going to sit here in this hole and wait? What was the mindset at that time?
So President Rhee and the government moved down south to Busan area. in 3 days because the government just totally collapsed. But the citizens didn't know where to go. Some people who had relatives living south, they began to move by train and by car, by donkey carts with all their things piled up. But our family and most of our neighborhood people stayed until November of that year. This is June when the war broke out. In November, Chinese entered the war. And when that happened, we knew we couldn't stand in Seoul and expect to survive. So that's when my family got up and neighbors too. And this is right before North Koreans bombed, Russian-made bomber bombed the bridge, Han River Bridge, that we needed to cross to go south. But just before they bombed it, we walked. It seems to me as a 5-year-old, it seemed like we walked at least 2 hours to a train station. And it was snow on the ground. And so it was cold. My grandmother, somehow my father found used American U.S. soldiers' huge big army coat, and she threw it on herself. And my mom had things on her head, and other people, they had blankets around themselves, those walking. And there were donkey carts where people sat on top of their belongings and everything. My mom and I and my grandma walked, no donkey cart either. So finally we arrived at the train station and got on the train. But the train was a boxcar, a series of boxcars, which meant there was no bathroom, there was no light, and there were no seats. You know the movie Dr. Zhivago, the Russian movie about Russian Revolution and how people piled into a train and they had bunk beds and everything? That was a 5-star hotel compared to what we rode. What we got on was boxcars, and we threw all our belongings on the floor and we just leaned against the pile of things or sat on top of it. And when the door closed, it was pitch dark. No bathroom for hours.
You mentioned something in your description that now that the Russians were going to invade, whereas before it was the North Koreans, how was that interpreted that they were going to be different from the North Koreans?
At least in North Korean case, coming down, attacking South, North Korean leader at that time, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, went to Soviet Union's leader Stalin many times and asked for permission to attack South because North Korea was going to need Russian air support, tanks, ammunition, all that. So he went to Stalin and had meetings several times, but Stalin kept saying, hey, wait until the right time. He was waiting for a Russian nuclear program to be completed to be able to compete against U.S. Nuclear program. Finally, when that happened, then Stalin said to Kim Il-sung, okay, go ahead. But if you fail, you're on your own. Maybe China will help you. You make sure China will help you when you start the war. All this Kim Il-sung having gone to Stalin for permission, nobody knew, no historians knew this until Catherine Weathersby, whom you will have as a guest. She is the first one who went to Moscow when Russia collapsed, Soviet Union collapsed, and the archive was opened up. She is the one to first go there and read all these documents in which the Stalin gave permission to North Korean Kim Il-sung. That's how it happened. So in this case, in Ukrainian case, nobody went to Russia to get permission to do it. Russia did it itself on its own. So that's one of the differences. There was a procedural thing for North Korea to go through.
Were the soldiers of North Korea, the invaders, different from the Russian invaders? I do believe there was some Russians involved in the invasion, ultimately it was mostly the Chinese. But did they treat the people differently as they were invading?
Oh, Russians provided tanks and drivers for the tanks and provided ammunition, guns and things. But Russian soldiers themselves, I don't believe, entered the war. So it's the air support and ground support in terms of guns and tanks. But later, in the fall of 1950, after General MacArthur's Incheon landing and UN and allies, South Korean troops began to advance north beyond 30th parallel, that's when China said, hey, don't approach Yalu River, the border of North Korea and China. We will enter the war. Just as Stalin expected, when North Koreans got into a bad spot there, China entered and helped. And so Chinese, of course, physically, their soldiers look very much like Chinese Koreans. And of course, South Koreans fighting against North Korea, we are identical, ethnically, we are identical group. We are the same blood. And so if it wasn't for the uniform, they would not be able to recognize each other as enemies. They would just see them as brothers. Very famous historian Sheila Mayoshi has a book on Korean War called Brothers at War. These are brothers, blood brothers, ethnically, for 3,000 years, killing each other. That's what is so, so tragic. This is a homicide committed by brothers against brothers. And in that sense, I suppose it's different from Ukrainian war. Many, many centuries ago, Ukraine was part of Russia, and so maybe there was ethnic commingling there too. But ethnically, they, I believe, are distinctly different, Russians and Ukrainians.
They're not Solvic, and Russia is not one group of people either. I mean,
Right,
they're
right. It's a federation.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of backgrounds there, and
Right, right.
really a lot of ethnic groups involved
Yes.
as well.
Right, right.
Let me take you back to on a personal level, the brutality of the war, the experience of having to flee, leave everything behind. What impact do you feel it had on you personally, your upbringing, and as well as that of your family?
Yes, I remember all those details. Ironically, well, after we arrived in Masan, ironically, my life turned to be a very happy one. This is an amazing story, but that's because while we were living in Seoul, because I was an only child and a girl, my parents needed a boy child. And so my father, after waiting for my mother to bear a boy child, after resisting having to get a mistress to get a boy baby, he finally relented, and a second wife came into our house, and we were living together. And it was very unhappy family. My mother was crying every night because her husband was sleeping with another woman in another room in the same house under the same roof. And everybody said it was because I was a girl. This happened because I was a girl. So I had an extremely unhappy 5, 6, 7-year-old life in Seoul. But once we got to Masan, it was countryside, not like Seoul, where to go to a park or a river, I had to wait for the weekend for mom and dad to take me there. But we were in the middle of nature in Masan. And so that's another reason I was happy there. Nobody knew anything about my family. I was dropped in the middle of nature, the hills and rivers, and I had new friends, and my life just turned completely happy, ironically.
When you say you were dropped off, were you left somewhere in some seminary, or were you just abandoned? What did you mean?
We all moved by train to Masan.
Okay.
And my mom was there, but I was joined by many new friends, and we explored nature. In Seoul, we were in the middle of big neighborhoods, and so to go to the nature parks and rivers, I had to wait for my parents to take me there on weekends. But in Masan, about 200 miles south of Seoul, I suddenly became a nature girl. I roamed the hills and picked strawberries and persimmons and apples. And I had friends who knew nothing about my family background, that I was cursed.
While you were in that area, what was the news about the war?
Yes, of course, even though I led a happier life, every day, adults were all gathered around radios. We didn't have TV at that time, radios, and they were all listening to radio news, daily news updates on how the war was going on. And so every day there would be President Seungman Rhee's voice coming on the radio, uh, talking about the brutality caused by North Koreans, communists, and how we must fight to the end and not allow this to continue one day more than necessary. And so he was encouraging, and he would show up with General MacArthur on TV too. We were just so grateful that General MacArthur, President Truman sent General MacArthur, and General MacArthur performed accomplished the Incheon landing and cut. Incheon is in the middle of the Korean Peninsula here. On the map here, this is where Incheon is. And General MacArthur landed here and then sent Allied troops all the way across to block the North Korean soldiers who came all the way down to the butt area of this map, which Koreans think looks like a rabbit standing on its hind legs. This is the legs, and this is the rabbit ear, and this is the butt area. And this is where North Korean soldiers pushed all the way down to this area. This is all South Korea had when General MacArthur came from Japan to save us. We were about to be thrown into the ocean any day when General MacArthur came, and he landed here in Incheon and secured capital of Seoul again. And so General MacArthur is definitely our hero.
World War II ended in 1945. So
Yes.
there was a 5-year respite, if you can say that, for this poor country of Korea to be back in a war again, to be now a different enemy. How did people deal with this?
I think we all are having a tough time dealing with it. This is a modern age where diplomatic relationships have been built since the well, some historians say the Cold War is still going on, but at least for the last 72 years since the Korean War ended in armistice agreement, there have been international, worldwide understanding of how brutal wars are. And all world communities have come to have this developed idea about world peace. World peace needs to be worked out cooperatively and peacefully. I think we have become used to that idea. And suddenly, oh my Lord, this Russian invasion just brought us smack against the memory of the Korean War, when Soviet-backed North Koreans invaded. No, I don't think anybody can say they can kind of more or less accept this Russian war against Ukraine. Big powers fight all the time, as they have done throughout human history. No, I don't think there are too many people thinking like that. We are all in shock of this unexpected, unsolicited, sudden attack. Of course, it's not sudden with Putin. He planned it. But yes, we are all having a terrible time facing this. and we're all struggling to deal with it. How do we do it? How do we help the war to end? And how do we help Ukrainians and others who help Ukrainians in this fight against Russia? How do we restore some semblance of peace? I think most of us could just cry.
Let me ask something. It's hypothetical, so there's really no basis to be able to support A or B concept here. But let me ask, because you have a closer sense of the experience. First of all, is there the idea that if South Korea had lost the war, had been absorbed by the North Koreans, that the war would have expanded into other countries?
Very possibly, yes. Very possibly. Actually, the Korean War threatened to expand and become a World War III. This happened when General MacArthur succeeded in the Incheon landing, cutting off North Korea right across here. And the General Baek Sun-yup, Korean general, and his battalion went up to Pyongyang, and he actually occupied North Korea. And this is one of the brightest moments in the history of Korea, 3-year Korean War. When he arrived there, he wired to President Lee Seung-man and General MacArthur, let's stop right there. We stop here because China was threatening to come down. And so this is September 15th, this Incheon landing. And shortly after that, General Baek Sun-yup, Korean general, was in Pyongyang. And he said, he sent a wire to these two leaders, let's stop right here. And let's just establish the defense line right here. And that will keep China from entering the war. The North Korean communists would be trapped in this area, the northern area, in this strip, not very big. And so General Peck's idea was just let's take our time to just squeeze them and make the North Korean communist country to collapse. Then we would be united under South Korea's democracy. Let's do it. And President Rhee and General MacArthur said, shut up, just keep going to the north. And this is when the Third World War could have happened, because China was coming in, they entered the war, came down, and Soviet was not going to sit there and watch that, and the Soviet Union would have entered. And so that would have been World War III happening right here in Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula area. It was imminently about to be happening when armistice, US, particularly US, Britain, and France, those countries' representatives wanted this stopped. Armistice, let's have a ceasefire. Don't go anymore because we're going to have Third World War. President Truman was very adamant that we don't open to another world war. So that's what happened. Armistice was agreed upon, and President Lee Seung-man was supremely unhappy about this. He wanted the whole peninsula to be united, and General MacArthur did too. But President Truman stopped that, and they got the armistice talk agreed upon and signed.
Obviously, the big change of the time was that now we had two countries had the atomic bombs, and that changed the whole platform. And I remember seeing of that time footage that they could actually put an atomic bomb on a smaller scale into
Yes.
some small artillery. So we're not talking about, Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but we're talking about big enough where you could put it in a cannon and start shooting off nuclear explosives. And I remember that discussion started to come in, so that played into it. And I guess I'm asking the question also from the perspective of looking at the Ukraine, where people say, well, if the Ukraine and the Russians settle it, that'll be the end of it. But there is also this backdrop thinking that no, if we give in to this level, then there'll be another invasion in another country, and it'll start to snowball.
Right,
So I
right.
see the parallels on that side. Let
Yes,
me let me ask this question from this perspective. Here we have the people in Asia, i.e., Southeast Asia, Koreans in that area, and here we have the Ukrainians in Eastern Europe. Even though they're different, even though different language, different cultures, maybe very little interaction between the two countries. Do you think they're going to share a lot of experiences, post-war trauma, that are very similar to both locations?
yes. I'm sure North Korea is paying very, very close attention to the war in Ukraine, how the world community is reacting to this. There will be a lot of comparisons and a lot of lessons being learned, not just by those who are involved in the Ukrainian war and those involved in forging ahead with the effort to reunify North and South Korea. There will be a lot of lessons here being learned all over.
The idea of North Korea wanting to invade South Korea in the present, here we are in 2022, is this something that they want to do, but the Chinese are telling them, no, don't do it? Or is it something that's holding them back from doing it, other obviously the world community at war?
I do believe, and many thinkers, researchers, watchers of the world affairs, events, all seem to agree that North Korea is aware of its lack of strength, even though they have nuclear power. If they drop it, the U.S. Defense capability covers would have an immediate response to that, and North Korea would be just wiped out off the face of the earth. North Korean leaders probably are aware of the swiftness of the action that will be taken against North Korea. North Korea really, really cannot survive such an attack and just swallow up South Korea and live happily thereafter. World watchers think North Korean leader is very intelligent person, and his cadre of leaders must have very highly educated idea about what might happen if they really bombed South Korea completely and try to eliminate it. They cannot do it without also destroying themselves. The technical, nuclear and technical military readiness are such in the South and in the United States that North must know they really cannot do anything without just killing themselves too in the process.
There'd be a mutual destruction if they take forward. Taking everything we've learned from you, and thank you for sharing your personal story as well. As I'm sure it's extremely difficult. Can you tell us and help us as we're moving toward the closure of the show? Help us to understand the culture, the Korean culture in 2022. What are people like given the outcomes of World War II, uh, Korean War? How's that impacted the development of the people today in South Korea?
Uh, Having gone through a brutal war like the Korean War, uh, the generation that were there, who were there in person throughout the war, and the generation after that, especially those two generations, and the values that they pass down onto the new generations, all contribute to the character of Koreans, national character, if you can call that. We are very, very tough, very resilient, and we are war experienced nation, and which the war experience would never leave us in everyday life. We have it in the back of our mind, the war. The war is possible. The war was there. I was there. This is me with my cousin. This was taken during the Korean War. And this is General MacArthur. And my brother is here. He served as a Navy airman. He was the equivalent of communication specialist in the TV program MASH. What's that guy's name in MASH? Communication specialist. Radar.
Ah,
My brother was the equivalent of radar. And today in Korea, there are escapees escaping North Korea. Okay, and they're coming down through Thailand and Burma and other countries, Indonesia, to South Korea. There are like tens of thousands of North Koreans living in South Korea now. They are escaping. And so the war did not end. There are escapees coming down to South even today. And they have their Chinese-made cell phones wrapped in plastic and put it in there between their in their mouths to swim across the Yalu River. Okay, the war did not end with Koreans. We have it in our psyche, and we are. Everybody is sad over Ukrainian war, but perhaps it strikes us personally even more dramatically. It strikes our hearts. We could just beat our hearts and cry that this would happen again in the human history. We cannot believe it.
ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking to Maija Devine, and I can't thank her enough for sharing her personal life and her personal wounds from her experiences, as well as those of the family and the community at large. I think it's critical that we understand and be sensitive and empathetic and see what we can do to help as well. Humans, we say we evolve, but unfortunately, war is still occurring, and we're facing that right now with Ukraine. And the possibility is, Maija shares, that could also happen in Korea. It's almost on a daily basis that the possibility of invasion. And while we may think it's not possible, I know I've had that thought at times. We have to think it's possible. Maija, I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thank you, Armando. See you again.
See you again. And just to reiterate, you are an author, you're a poet, and I have the benefit of seeing both. And please tell us about your book. I know you have one on the comfort women, and I think you're working on another one. Tell us about that, please.
Another one is a collection of poems. This is this deals with many regions of the world. I have poems there about Ukraine, Afghanistan. When Afghanistan, the Taliban fell under Taliban, I have a poem on that. So I have kind of poems on international topics. And so I am submitting the manuscript to different places right now. And comfort women too. There are about 20-30 poems about comfort women.
And that's a show that we said we were going to do also. So yeah. I'm sharing that up front right now. Please keep tuned to that, because we are going to do the show where we're going to do an interview specifically on the comfort women, World War II, etc. So
thank you,
Maija, thank you for your time. Say hi to your husband. I also enjoy talking to him as well, Michael Devine. And please stay safe. Here we are not only dealing with the world issues, we're also dealing in the pandemic that is still here. So I wish you again success, and I look forward to having you on future shows.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.